what's turning out to be a bit of a Gregory Peck kick these days. A couple weeks back I reviewed The Seawolves, and prior to that I had watched the 60th anniversary Blu-ray of To Kill a Mockingbird, and in between those two I watched the 1999 documentary A Conversation with Gregory Peck, which, if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend. It's a really fascinating look at him in his later years, touring the country, doing live shows where he tells stories and speaks with fans of his, and in between these, we get a look at him in private life. It's a great watch and is a bonus feature on the To Kill a Mockingbird Blu-ray that came out last year. But anyway, next up for me was Mirage, which was released in 1965 and also stars Diane Baker, George Kennedy, and Walter Matthau, and was directed by Edward Dmytryk. In the film, accountant David Stilwell suddenly realizes that he is suffering from amnesia, and that the last 2 years of his life are a mystery to him. Determined to figure out what has happened to him, he hires a private detective, and the two of them set out to discover the truth and avoid the apparent hitmen that have a nasty habit of turning up. Going in, I looked at this movie and thought, mid-60s thriller, co-starring Walter Matthau and George Kennedy, this is sounding a lot like Charade with Cary Grant and Audrey Hepburn. I've been a fan of Charade forever. That image of George Kennedy's body floating in a bathtub with his hook for a hand, it's been ingrained in my mind ever since I was a kid, and I've watched it quite a number of times since then. So I was very pleasantly surprised to realize it was written by Peter Stone, who also penned Charade, and this movie was designed by Universal to hopefully recapture the success that Charade enjoyed. It didn't, but that doesn't mean it isn't a good movie. Between the two, Charade is better, I will admit that, but Mirage is still a lot of fun. The premise is fantastic, and its approach to using amnesia as a plot device was really well handled. A lot of people seem to think that having amnesia in a story automatically means it's going to be hackneyed, cliche-ridden stuff, and it can be. But here, it's really not, because this isn't your typical Bourne Identity style, who am I, where am I type of opening. David Stilwell is under the impression that his life is completely normal, until he realizes everyone around him either doesn't remember him, or that they haven't seen him in quite some time. And that's when it dawns on him, I've been missing for about 2 years, and I'm not sure what I'm even doing here in New York. And that's great. I love that. The movie opens with a blackout in the building David works at. That whole opening sequence sets up the idea of people being unknown to him, and he to them, so well. The silhouetted figures with only flashes of recognition using flashlight beams, the use of shadow, establishes this idea of never really being sure of who someone is or where you are. It's all shot so well too by Joseph McDonald, and the editing by Ted J. Kent is incredible. Very early on we realize we can't always trust what we're seeing. For example, the scene where Gregory Peck and Diane Baker are descending stairs into the many sub-levels of the basement. Soon after that, we realize there are no sub-levels, and even just something like that builds this tense, unsettling atmosphere perfectly, and they keep that up throughout the film. There were so many moments that I audibly said, what is going on? Because you're trapped in this maze of memories and dangerous figures lurking everywhere. Gregory Peck brings the character to life very well, which is not surprising, but something I realized partway through is that Gregory Peck doesn't really play worried or frightened. There are probably examples in other films that I'm not remembering right now, but as you watch David Stilwell, it's the kind of movie that really puts you in the what would I do in this scenario type of mindset. And I can picture myself being quite frightened. Having relentless gun-toting men chasing me might provoke that. And Gregory Peck doesn't really give us that, and at times felt almost too casual about the whole situation. You could even say he doesn't always act like a victim of amnesia, but that works because he doesn't immediately realize that's what he is. When he does best is in the moments where the confusion and frustration about what is happening boils over. Specifically, the scene where he forces Diane Baker to stare at a dead body to confront the reality of the nightmare he's facing. Or when he himself stumbles across another corpse, he completely loses it and destroys the office that he's standing in. Which leads me to believe the character was suppressing a lot for an impressive amount of time until he can no longer take it and lashes out. In these scenes, Gregory Peck blew me away. Diane Baker plays a mysterious woman that appears to know David Stilwell, but annoyingly refuses to give him any information. Her character is the biggest question mark in the movie. Why wouldn't she just fill him in on everything she knows? The real answer is because the movie is more mysterious when she drops a cryptic hint and then vanishes. But really, why not just tell him? I didn't get the impression she was in any danger if she would. There are questions of her loyalty and who it lies with as well, but overall, her character just bothered me once the movie was over. Diane Baker is good in the role though, and while there might not be a lot of chemistry between her and Gregory Peck, I enjoyed her in the movie. Walter Matthau, though, is a real highlight as the rookie private investigator that Stillwell picks at random to help him. He's the source of a lot of comedy, which works for the movie, and he and Peck have a great deal of chemistry. They're very different actors and are playing very different characters, but their dynamic is the most fleshed out and the most fun to watch on screen. George Kennedy plays a steel-rimmed, glasses-wearing thug that is on the hunt for Stillwell. George Kennedy is one of those character actors that I consistently enjoy, and though he doesn't speak much here, he's still very memorable as this ruthless, formidable monster that is never far away. He and Gregory Peck have a really well-done fistfight that felt realistic. David Stillwell is not a skilled fighter, and it shows. The fight choreography is anything but smooth. Stillwell struggles to get up when he's knocked down, but when he gets the upper hand, he throws himself into it. The punches are viciously thrown in close-up. You can almost feel them yourself. Kevin McCarthy has a small role as a superior of Stillwell's that might not be what he appears to be, and this becomes more evident as the film goes on. I won't reveal much more, but he delivers some really well-handled moments during the final scenes, mostly without dialogue, and I thought he was very good. Leif Erickson, soon to be the star of The High Chaparral at this point, also has a role that I can't talk about if I want to stay spoiler-free, which I do. All I will say is that he plays a powerful, wealthy man who arrogantly believes that he can buy off anyone to do anything, and for most of these characters, he's right. Robert H. Harris plays a psychiatrist that Stillwell goes to try and make sense of what has happened to him. One note on that, Stillwell passes a bookstore, sees a random book, and finds the good doctor's name referenced in it, so decides to visit him. This was maybe the biggest narrative leap in the movie, unless you want to talk about parts of the ending, and it didn't quite work for me. Why wouldn't he just look in a phone book? He picked the private detective at random too, but that I didn't mind. I think it's the looking in a book thing that bothers me. But anyway, I like Robert Harris. He plays this pompous and rather unfeeling, self-described genius very nicely. And finally, Jack Weston shows up as another henchman that doggedly pursues Stillwell, and he's the first example I'll give of the somewhat surreal characters that populate this movie. He shows up at Stillwell's apartment and sits down to watch wrestling on TV while holding a gun on Stillwell. Jack Weston makes the character very funny, snapping at Gregory Peck not to sit on his hat. That whole scene is just a weird, comedic, but also puzzling furtherance to the mystery, and I loved it. Gregory Peck tackles Jack Weston at one point, and rather than show us their fight, the camera instead holds on the wrestling match on the TV, and we watch one wrestler go down for the count, at which point we cut back to a bloodied and unconscious Jack Weston. There's also a strange moment when Gregory Peck and Diane Baker are trying to evade the police and come to an apartment where a small girl is standing in the doorway. Without a word, she lets them inside and pretends to serve them coffee. Once the police have gone, they put her to bed, the only bed we actually see in the apartment by the way, and leave. She has no parents around, and the whole situation is never explained. There's something so off-kilter about it that plays into the tone of the movie perfectly. And there's yet another hitman that pops up, this one a very elderly, homeless-looking man with a strong southern accent of unknown origin. He's played by House Jameson, and plays him with such kooky exuberance that you want to know more about him, but again, it's even better that we don't really find out what his deal is. He's given great dialogue, and I'll say that of the whole movie. There are some vague, but at the same time heavy-handed feeling monologues towards the end that felt a little clunky, but besides that, the whole movie has interesting exchanges and unusual dialogue that made it feel out of the ordinary. The scene where Stillwell tries to file a police report is a great example. The use of memories is handled really well, and again, I'll talk about the editing. We'll suddenly cut to a memory that Stillwell is having. It isn't accompanied by a burst of dramatic music, typically, and it can either be a moment we've already observed, or something else that is still a mystery to us and Stillwell. They're always very brief, oftentimes the sound is dropped out completely, and then we'll cut back to Gregory Peck looking ever so slightly bewildered. And these memories are cued realistically. We don't have to have someone saying the exact same words to drive Stillwell to remember someone saying that same thing to him several days previously. It can be something as simple as an image of people talking under a tree that brings back memories that have been flashing through his mind since the beginning of the movie. There are so many moments I want to mention, and I think that's indicative of the strengths of this movie. It's a movie that you watch for the mood or the interesting visuals. I haven't even mentioned that a big part of the story is that someone jumped from a window to their death during the blackout at the start. There's a shocking visualization of that, with the man's body falling through the air, arms flailing, but before he lands, we cut to a watermelon exploding on the ground. It's obvious symbolism brought on by a comment made by an off-screen Myron Healy, but it's arguably more grotesque than seeing the man hit the ground in the sanitized style that 1965 would have dictated. There's a really suspenseful chase through a park that leads to a confrontation under a bridge. The shots are beautiful, with Gregory Peck standing there like a hunted animal, with the dark silhouette of Kevin McCarthy looming at the end. Noir-style imagery like that is like a comforting warm blanket for me. I just want to revel in scenes like that. But then they lighten it with George Kennedy ricocheting a bullet through the tunnel, nearly hitting Kevin McCarthy in the head. The chase continues after that, but there's something very funny about McCarthy shouting, "You almost killed me!" as George Kennedy lumbers past. The ending, which again I won't discuss in detail, isn't totally satisfying. There's some railing against big business, there's mention of nuclear power, non-profit organizations, and dirty backroom deals, so it's a catch-all for a variety of issues with many controversial opinions swirling around them. It's muddled, but we do get some answers, and overall the scene is still suspenseful and enjoyable. There are questions that I would have liked answered though, which I'll pose here. If you know the answers, please let me know in the comments, and if you've never seen this movie, these questions will mean nothing to you. But why did they kill Joe Turtle? I have some ideas, but I don't think that was really addressed. Why wouldn't Gregory Peck and Walter Matthau call the police to come arrest George Kennedy after the confrontation in the basement? And why was Stillwell supposed to take his briefcase to Barbados after the blackout? The interested party was still right there in New York, as far as I know. And why was Diane Baker so involved with the Major? At first I thought she was an employee, but by the end, I don't think so. Anyway, thankfully these questions don't hobble the movie enough to ruin it for me. An ending can make or break a movie, but with something like Mirage, the journey there is far more interesting, and that's what I enjoyed so much about it. The location photography in New York is gorgeous, and I always love the look of 60s widescreen black and white films. It's often been said that Charade is the best Hitchcock movie that Alfred Hitchcock didn't direct, and it still is. But Mirage feels like another Hitchcock movie that Alfred Hitchcock didn't direct. It also feels like some other movies that have come since. Unknown with Liam Neeson was the first thing that came to mind. The twist ending of that one had me guessing a similar twist here, and I was way off. Dark City is another one, a more science fiction style take on the man on the run trying to uncover his recent past type of story. There are plenty of others as well, all given the Hitchcockian label, despite not being quite up to par with the classics of Alfred Hitchcock. But this was directed by Dmytryk, and he brought back the film noir style that he used decades earlier in movies like Murder My Sweet and Crossfire, but updated for this newer style of filmmaking. During this period, he was making a lot of westerns, war films, and dramas, and Mirage is a nice thriller thrown into the mix. If you've never seen it, I'd recommend seeking it out. It really does keep you guessing, and gives you a less glossy feeling dose of what made Charade so much fun. In the same mold was Arabesque from the following year, which again brought back Peter Stone as one of the writers, but that time had Stanley Donen back in the director's chair. I've seen it once, years ago, and I'm looking forward to seeing it again. Thanks very much for watching. If you've enjoyed this, hope you consider checking back to Hildebrand Productions for more. Thanks again, and adios for now.